An icy night near Buffalo killed 49 in a Dash 8 and rewrote the FAA's pilot experience rule for a generation. The crash of Continental Connection Flight 3407 on February 12, 2009, stands as a watershed moment in modern aviation history. Operating under the Continental Connection banner, the twin-engine turboprop was simply completing a routine commuter route before a cascading sequence of events began. The investigation into the tragedy revealed a compounding chain of technical errors, systemic operational flaws, and regulatory oversights. This breakdown relies entirely on the facts, analysis, and conclusions documented in the National Transportation Safety Board's Final Aircraft Accident Report, NTSB/AAR 10/01.
The exact casualty figure for the accident in Clarence Center, New York, is 50. 49 people aboard the Bombardier DHC-8-400 were killed, including the two pilots, Captain Marvin Renslow and First Officer Rebecca Shaw, along with 2 flight attendants and 45 passengers. One person on the ground was also killed when the aircraft crashed into a residence about 5 nautical miles northeast of the Buffalo-Niagara International Airport. The aircraft was entirely destroyed by impact forces and a post-crash fire.
The investigation is broken down into 4 parts. 1. Approach to Buffalo. 2. The technical failure. 3. Institutional failures. 4. Findings and aftermath.
Section 1. Approach to Buffalo. Entering icing conditions. Continental Connection Flight 3407 was operated by Colgan Air, flying en route from Liberty International Airport in Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo. The descent occurred at night under visual meteorological conditions, though the aircraft was operating in confirmed icing conditions. Between 3,000 and 14,000 feet, multiple pilot reports from the area indicated light to moderate rime icing. Rime icing happens when supercooled water droplets freeze immediately upon impacting the leading edge of an aircraft's wings, which changes the aerodynamic shape of the lifting surfaces.
During the climb to cruise altitude, Captain Renslow correctly engaged the airframe and propeller de-icing systems. Crucially, he also selected the increased position for the reference speed switch on the ice protection panel. This action lowered the angle of attack reference, which is the angle between the wing and the oncoming air, for the stick shaker activation. It also raised the position of the low-speed cue on the instrument displays by approximately 15 knots. Essentially, this ensures the aircraft maintains necessary performance margins relative to stall speed during operations in icing conditions, causing the stall warning systems to activate earlier to protect the degraded aerodynamics.
The sequence of events accelerated rapidly during the final descent. At 22:16:21 Eastern Standard Time, at an airspeed of roughly 145 knots, First Officer Shaw confirmed the landing gear was down. At 22:16:23, Captain Renslow called for the flaps to be set to 15 degrees. Flight data recorder information indicates a critical discrepancy here. The flaps were only selected to 10 degrees by the first officer, an operational error that altered the expected drag and lift profile of the aircraft. As the airspeed slowed further without the expected 15-degree flap configuration, the stall margins evaporated. At 22:16:27.4, the stick shaker activated at an airspeed of 131 knots, providing severe tactile and oral warnings of an impending stall. The autopilot immediately disconnected. The investigation definitively ruled out weather as the primary culprit. As documented on page 151 of the NTSB accident report, the minimal aircraft performance degradation resulting from ice accumulation did not affect the flight crew's ability to fly and control the airplane. The presence of airframe ice was not the cause of the loss of control. The aircraft was responding to control inputs exactly as expected prior to the disruption.
Section 2. The technical failure, the aerodynamic stall. The transition from a stable instrument approach to a catastrophic loss of control was executed directly through specific technical inputs made by the flight crew. Explicit visual and tactile cues of an impending stall were present on the flight instruments, with adequate time for corrective action, yet the crew failed to intervene appropriately.
Flight data recorder information shows that about 18 seconds before the stick shaker activated, the low-speed cue began to rise from the bottom of the airspeed display. The numbers on the display actually changed from white to red as the airspeed decayed toward the calculated stick shaker activation speed. First Officer Shaw, functioning as the monitoring pilot, failed to monitor this decreasing airspeed in relation to the rising position of the low-speed cue. In a multi-crew cockpit, monitoring airspeed during a dynamic phase of flight is a fundamental duty, one that was completely missed as the speed steadily dropped into dangerous territory.
A proper stall recovery procedure requires the flying pilot to apply forward pressure on the control column. This decreases the angle of attack, reattaching smooth airflow over the wings while simultaneously increasing power.
Instead, at the exact moment of autopilot disconnect, Captain Renslow applied a 37-pound pull force to the control column. This aft movement resulted in an airplane nose-up elevator deflection. Pitch attitude increased to 18 degrees, slowing the airspeed to 125 knots and increasing the load factor to 1.4 Gs. This sudden, aggressive pull-up effectively increased the weight the wings had to support, ensuring the airflow separated and the wing completely stalled.
The direct technical cause of the aerodynamic stall is explicitly documented on page 83 of the report. The NTSB concludes that the captain's inappropriate aft control column inputs in response to the stick shaker caused the airplane's wing to stall.
Following that initial stall, the aircraft rolled left, then violently right. As the aircraft rolled up to 105 degrees right wing down, the automated stick pusher activated. The stick pusher is a mechanical safety system designed to physically force the nose down and recover airspeed when a stall is imminent. It activated 3 separate times. Data from the stall protection system shows Captain Renslow fought the safety system on all 3 occasions. He applied a 41-pound pull force, then a 90-pound pull force, and finally up to a 160-pound pull force against the stick pusher, driving the aircraft into an unrecoverable descent into Clarence Center. Analyzing the psychological factors underlying these severe control errors, investigators noted on page 89, the NTSB concludes that the captain's response to stick shaker activation should have been automatic, but his improper flight control inputs were inconsistent with his training and were instead consistent with startle and confusion. By continually overriding the exact mechanical systems designed to prevent a crash, the aerodynamic stall became fatal. The report continues on that exact same page. The NTSB further concludes that the captain did not recognize the stick pusher's action to decrease AOA as a proper step in a stall recovery, and his improper flight control inputs to override the stick pusher exacerbated the situation. Section 3. Institutional failures beyond the cockpit. The physical control errors executed by Captain Renslow and First Officer Shaw were the final actions in a long chain of institutional and operational failures embedded deeply within Colgan Air's systemic practices.
The investigation identified critical factors compromising the flight deck environment long before the plane reached Buffalo. These included sterile cockpit violations, inadequate stall recovery training that lacked full stick pusher realism, and severe pilot fatigue driven by industry commuting policies. During the critical descent phase, the cockpit voice recorder captured continuous, non-pertinent conversations between the pilots regarding their respective aviation careers, their industry progression, and their previous icing experiences. This diverted their focus from the rapidly deteriorating flight parameters.
The fatal consequence of this sterile cockpit violation is laid out on page 93. Because of their conversation, the flight crew members squandered time and their attention, which were limited resources that should have been used for attending to operational tasks, monitoring, maintaining situational awareness, managing possible threats, and preventing potential errors.
Furthermore, the airline's own culture failed the crew by not requiring strict discipline during instrument approaches. As stated on page 95, the NTSB concludes that Colgan Air's standard operating procedures at the time of the accident did not promote effective monitoring behavior. There were no specified callouts required for airspeed deviations during the descent, leaving the pilots completely unequipped to catch their own errors.
This resulted in a total collapse of crew resource management, which is summarized on page 104. The NTSB concludes that the flight crew members' performance during the flight, including the captain's deviations from standard operating procedures and the first officer's failure to challenge these deviations, was not consistent with the CRM training that they had received or the concepts in the FAA CRM guidance.
Further degrading their technical performance was chronic and acute fatigue. Both pilots were long-distance commuters. Captain Renslow commuted to Newark from Florida. First Officer Shaw began her commute from Seattle the night before the accident, flying overnight on a cargo flight through Memphis and arriving in Newark at 06:23 on the day of the crash. Neither had secured a hotel room. Rather than obtaining rest in proper isolated facilities, both pilots spent the hours prior to their evening shift attempting to sleep in a busy company crew room equipped with couches, constant foot traffic, and ringing phones.
The flight crew was acutely fatigued by the time they initiated the nighttime descent into Buffalo. The board's assessment of their condition is stark. Page 110 reveals, neither pilot made use of the opportunity to obtain quality sleep and be as rested as possible before the flight. Ultimately, the report places the burden of this fatigue heavily upon the airline. Stating on page 111, the NTSB concludes that operators have a responsibility to identify risks associated with commuting, implement strategies to mitigate these risks, and ensure that their commuting pilots are fit for duty. Section 4. Findings and aftermath. The thorough investigation into Colgan Air Flight 3407 concluded with strict determinations regarding the immediate mechanical and human causes of the tragedy, resulting in safety recommendations that targeted the very foundation of regional airline operations.
The final, definitive determination is found on page 155. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the captain's inappropriate response to the activation of the stick shaker, which led to an aerodynamic stall from which the airplane did not recover.
Following the conclusion of the NTSB's investigation and its subsequent safety recommendations, established public record documents a massive legislative response. Congress passed the Airline Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010. This legislation led directly to the implementation of the 1,500-hour airline transport pilot rule, dramatically increasing the minimum flight hours required for first officers. The FAA also instituted FAR 117, enacting stringent new pilot rest and fatigue risk management rules, and mandated comprehensive full-stall recovery training across the industry. The loss of Flight 3407 effectively rewrote pilot experience rules for a generation. But as aviation continues to expand and the demand for pilots grows, the question remains: did this tragedy permanently cure the industry's systemic fatigue, or are we just waiting for those same cracks to quietly surface again?